Welcome to Imaginary CTF. This is Infosec Decoded number 47. And we're starting with Irvin, who has a rioter that had to unlock his laptop.
Yeah, a judge forced one of the rioters who showed up with the camera to unlock his laptop, which was not necessarily password protected, but had biometrics. This is one of those reminders that shows up in forensics classes of biometrics is not protected under law. A password is because you have to reveal the contents of your mind, but biometrics not so much because they can get your fingerprint, they can get your picture of your face.
So even if it's going to incriminate you, they can still get in?
Yeah, well, the judge has to weigh that, but biometrics isn't protected.
Yeah. Well, I watch these precedents go by, and there are a lot of contradictory precedents, but that's important.
Yeah. If you have biometrics set up on your phone or on your laptop, just know that if law enforcement gets it, they can force you to unlock it.
Because what they can't compel is speech, right? And you're
Yeah, they can't compel you to reveal the contents of your mind.
right. So the Fifth Amendment protects you from speech.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But fingerprints, face recognition, that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's all good stuff that they can use.
Okay. That's useful to know. And then you got command line obfuscation.
Yes, I found this article this morning of a bunch of different ways that you can obfuscate your commands in Windows. It's pretty awesome. Like being able to shorthand different things or being able to change different letters for different things and still get the same result.
Yeah, I've seen this. I see it in PHP a lot, and I've also seen it a lot in PowerShell, where they like base 64 it and stuff.
Yeah. So now you can also do that with command line.
Yeah, and that's this would seem to be really important because you can't have like an IDS or security software detect a malicious activity if it can't read the command line.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
give them a real headache, I think, and probably be good for people that want to write malware that will get through. I was just writing some malware to make projects for incident response, and I have to start everything with turning off Windows Defender because I'm not good enough at hiding my stuff from Windows Defender. So this might help.
Yeah.
Oh, good. And then you got Imaginary CTF.
Yes, this CTF started last year. Yeah, I think it was last year. A group of students from my competitions program decided to make their own little community, their own little CTF. And the first time we helped them out, we actually gave them infrastructure and helped them run their CTF, which was highly successful. And now they're doing it again. And this time they have a much bigger crowd who wants to play.
I know a lot of people that start their little CTF, they find out that the load is really high. You get like 10,000 players and your servers all crash unless you're really prepared for it.
Yeah, well, I mean, we prepared because I have everything in the cloud, so
Good.
I can easily scale. But this year they're doing it completely on their own, and I couldn't be more prouder.
Oh yeah, no, that's great. And I think Easy CTF went away. The high school CTF, we really need a replacement.
Yeah.
So
So
maybe
this is all made by high school kids.
Yeah, well, that's great because there's so many CTFs that are too hard. We need more that are not too hard.
Yep.
Good. And when does it start?
It starts. I think it starts today.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it starts today and ends on Tuesday.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. All right. Well, that's good. Maybe I'll check it out.
Yeah.
Good. All right. And then we got Kaitlyn with Akamai's outage.
Yes. So Akamai is, of course, a big service provider for all things internet. And The Independent has an article written by Adam Smith, not that Adam Smith, another Adam Smith. I imagine that name's pretty popular, talking about how, what happened is that yesterday Akamai apparently had a major failure in one of their facilities. I'm not sure what happened. I speculate someone tripped over a wire. And because it's Akamai and they're central to all these different services all over the internet, thousands of websites went down, including things like Costco, UPS. And God forbid, Steam. Steam apparently went down too. That was the worst. That obviously impacted everyone the most. So yeah, it shows what happens when you when you have these large companies that deliver our services to everyone else, and we see this replicated in our production cycle. So when you have one company that provides services or provides infrastructure, provides a single critical piece of support for everyone else, if something happens to them, suddenly industries all over the place go down. And that's what happened with Akamai. So.
Yeah, and I don't know about Akamai. I know Cloudflare, this happened occasionally, and they always have really detailed reports afterwards of exactly what happened, how they fixed it, and all that. And I hope Akamai does.
Oh no, they released their full report right here. They said, we have implemented a fix for the issue, and based on current observations, the service is resuming normal operations. We will continue to monitor to ensure that the impact has been fully mitigated.
I saw that, and see, that is not what I want.
So this is why I'm thinking someone tripped over a wire, because
well, but I really feel like it would be nice if they would tell you that. I would like to know just what happened.
I would like to know too. Unfortunately, and this kind of speaks to Akamai. I think that the fact that they don't want to be too open about what exactly happened. Apparently, this has to do something with their DNS infrastructure.
Yeah,
that went down, but they're not really saying what happened.
Yeah, well, I see that's one of the reasons I love Cloudflare. They have really, really good technical explanations of everything, which is good if you want to learn about the internet anyway.
Yeah, I mean, if tech companies learned that outages are inevitable, that stuff just happens, and that being open about it is advantageous, we would be in a much better position rather than feeling like it's a disgrace when you should hang your head in shame.
Well, yeah, I mean, the fact is, this is what makes me trust people, is when they admit their mistakes and discuss them in a clear, open way.
Indeed.
Yeah. All right. And then Alan's got big telco lobbying.
Yes, another week, another pod.
He seems to be gone. You seem to have gone silent, Alan. I think the telco must have found out that you were bad-mouthing them and pulled the plug. I don't know. It looks like Alan might have to file a lawsuit to get back on. Maybe we'll go ahead and see if Alan can resolve his lawsuit. Well, I've got DeepMind. I've been hearing about protein folding all my life. I used to work with proteins in the world of physics, although we weren't that concerned with the folding, but other people were, and they regarded this as one of the huge computational problems. And there was folding at home, like SETI at home, where you would donate your computers to help figure out how proteins fold. And apparently, this has been solved to some extent by something called DeepMind, which uses AI, and they claim that they have made a map of all the folding of all the proteins in the human body or something of that sort. They say this is like the human DNA sequencing, and they made it open source and available to everybody. And so they're comparing this. They say it's a huge, gigantic scientific accomplishment, like sequencing the human DNA. It's a surprise to me. Last I heard, the folding problem was essentially impossible. I didn't expect we'd ever get there. So we will see. But anyway, it's certainly the largest contribution of AI to science. And it opens up a lot of interesting questions. Like, one of the problems with AI is you can't really audit the work. You don't really know if they got it right. But I mean, the way to find out how proteins are folded is incredibly burdensome. You have to make a protein crystal. Then you have to use X-ray crystallography to make it. And then you have to use huge computer programming, computer analysis to try to reconstruct from the dots of the crystallography the structure of the protein. So only a small number of proteins have been analyzed in this fashion to find out how they fold. So I guess they probably used those cases to train the AI. Anyway, it sounds really important. And it also sounds to me like an early version. I wouldn't be surprised if there'll be some corrections to this. But anyway, let's see. Alan, are you back?
Hopefully, yes.
Oh, yes, I can hear you now. All right, well, go ahead. You were talking about this telco.
Yes. As I was trying to say before my ISP cut me off, it's another week and yet another story about big telecom and big telecom's political machinations this time. Vice has a story on a report from Common Cause and the communications Workers of America that details how the various communications companies in the US have spent $234 million in the past Congress, 116th Congress, between lobbying and campaign contributions. And that breaks out to about $320,000 a day in contributions and lobbying. So it's not because of America's outstanding telecommunications infrastructure, and it's not because of perfect competition and free market forces. It's because of political contributions and machinations by the telcos that we have such terrible service in this country. And really, that's all there is to say about it.
Well, yeah, and I think this is firm. I mean, this is the American system of bribery and corruption, and it is firmly entrenched since the Supreme Court's decision of Citizens United that has enshrined corporations are people and money is speech. And the First Amendment means that corporations can spend all the money to influence politicians, and that cannot be restricted. So we've got some deep corruption. This is why, you know, the campaigners like Bernie talk about that we ought to do something about the money in politics. Is the really big one of the fundamental root causes of the problems in America. But I think there's no chance of any of that getting any better anytime soon.
Seems very unlikely, even though a very strong majority of Americans are opposed to the principles of Citizens United. I think in polls, it's been over 80% of people disapprove of the principles of Citizens United. It's not the kind of topic that gets voters to get out and vote the way, say, gun rights or abortion does. It doesn't animate.
The whole point of it is that the voters don't matter. What matters is the corporations. And this is nothing new. I mean, I think it's more than a century ago that they said, you know, an honest politician is one that stays bought.
Yes. And hats off to the telco companies. They're doing a very good job of picking the right politicians, because those politicians are doing a good job of towing the line.
And you know who didn't do this was Microsoft. This is what Bill Gates found when they came to break up his company with antitrust, and he barely survived thanks to a Republican winning the presidential election. They asked him, what did you learn from this? And he said, I've learned that you have to make political contributions to survive. He learned how the American system works. You got to pay your bribes or you will lose. So anyway, it's similar to what I hear in San Francisco. There are underground criminal mobs. You have to pay protection money or they'll burn down your business and such like that.
Really?
Anyway, oh, yeah. I've heard about especially the Chinese restaurants and such. They're paying protection money.
Oh.
And that you see them burn down every now and then.
Huh.
And they also send like gangs to like trash the business during the daytime, sort of like the old mafia smashing glass and stuff. You know, it's the more cynical people, which I somewhat agree with, say that the government is just the criminal mob that won and therefore declared their activities legal. Anyway, sometimes it's better than that. And a lot of times it's not. Anyway, so then we got Liz with China weaponizing cybersecurity research.
Yeah, so this is kind of an interesting article that I found on the Microsoft website of all places. And I had been reading about how China is enacting new rules in order to protect people's data security, which really surprised me. But that's a thing that's happening in this fall. And I mean, it sounded, from what I've read so far of the regulations they're passing, it sounded pretty good, sort of like a GDPR or California privacy regulation type law. However, this is the first time that I've seen another aspect of that where the article mentions that companies that operate within China, as soon as they discover or become aware of a vulnerability, they're mandated to report it to the federal government in China within 2 days of finding it, which is pretty amazing. And I can see there, you know, I can see two sides to this. On one hand, they are keeping track of breaches and vulnerabilities. And on the other hand, the position that this article takes is that that's really a bad thing because it requires reporting those vulnerabilities to their government before the companies will have a chance to patch them, which I can see why that would be a bad thing also.
Well, this is what Nicole Perlroth wrote her book about, is they find vulnerabilities in America, and then they say, do we want to actually tell somebody and get it patched, or do we want to keep it a secret, the NSA, so we have a weapon? And there's arguments for both sides. I remember 10 years ago or so when I read the LulzSec dumps and found SQL injections inside the Chinese government. And then there was a hot argument about this in the community. People said, you should tell the US government so they can use that to attack China. And I said, well, maybe we should tell China so we can patch their stuff. And there was an argument.
Yeah, totally.
And you could go either way.
Mm-hmm. So the debate still rages.
Yeah, well, now, of course, in the American system, we have no apparent rules, but what we have is the NSA will pay big money for it. So that encourages you to give it to them. That's the American solution. Put it in the free market.
Right.
All right. And so then we got Kaitlyn banning Amnesty.
Right. So The Guardian has an article here talking about how the great and glorious Indian nation will be banning the nefarious Amnesty International operations because essentially what Amnesty did is they took a piece of software and they illegally reverse engineered it and told everyone how to find it on their phones. And the Indian government is very upset about this because the software in question is called Pegasus. And it goes on people's phones and it stops left-wing extremists from, organizing and trying to, save, minorities from persecution. I mean, it's really legitimate. And unfortunately, there are these organizations like Amnesty International, which are trying to undermine these efforts to quash civil rights. And so the Indian government has put their foot down and said, this is not going to happen. They want to ban Amnesty International. And what actually makes this kind of interesting, of course, and I'm going to speak honestly going forward, is that Amnesty International has ties to the British government. So here we have the Indian government who is trying to spy on left-wing groups using the Pegasus spyware, all upset at Amnesty International, which then decrypted and told everyone how to defeat Pegasus. And then now, this has become a political scuffle between India and the UK now. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that NSO leak is, of course, headlines everywhere. But Amnesty always getting in trouble. I mean, I think a lot of people are mad at America. America's been on their hate list for years because of our racist death penalty, where most people we kill for the death penalty are black, and we cannot justify that. And therefore, they say we need to abolish the death penalty, and our failure to do that makes us sort of an immoral nation, which is a pretty good argument, I'd say.
It is a good argument. And I was wondering why Amnesty International, because I was trying to read the article on a government computer. And Amnesty was blocked. And I was like, huh.
I'm not getting kicked out of America more because they pull no punches. They will find what's wrong about you and trumpet its flaws.
Yeah, and the thing is that there's a lot wrong with Amnesty too, but it gets a lot of people are after them to publish it, so they're not perfect either. But So I did go over the leaks for Pegasus, and there's a lot of development that goes on this thing. Like, it's not some little thing that just went on a bunch of people's phones. Just looking at the IOCs, they bought so many domains and it's constantly under development. I mean, there is big business in spying on your citizens, big business.
Oh yeah. It's just like any other weapons research, like fighter jets or something. There's a lot of technology and a lot of money. Oh gosh, yes. Yeah, the cyber war is employment for our students. That's the way I see it. Anyway. So, all right, and Alan's got, another one, looks like the China, another version of the China issue with the 0 days.
Yeah, and this dovetails nicely with what Liz was just talking about. The Cyberspace Administration of China has just decreed that Security researchers, cybersecurity researchers must disclose any vulnerabilities that they find to the CAC, the Cybersecurity Administration. And this takes effect on September 1st of this year. Now, this does not prevent researchers from disclosing the vulnerabilities to the company that releases the software. So it's not like they're trying to block these vulnerabilities from being patched. It's simply that researchers are now going to have to share that information with the CAC. That's going to be required. And it also prevents researchers from selling or publishing that information, at least without properly giving information to the CAC. Also stipulated is that researchers must not deliberately exaggerate the harm that these vulnerabilities can cause, which is an interesting addition to this. So there's no FUD here, or no FUD in China, no fear, uncertainty, and what is it?
And doubt.
I can't remember. But so, yeah, so it's a good policy in some ways. Depends on what the Chinese government, of course, does with these the knowledge of these vulnerabilities too. That is, of course, the concern here. But it does represent something of an effort to regulate what researchers do with any vulnerabilities that they find, and perhaps reduces the weaponizing of vulnerabilities.
This is certainly a very different spin on it, making it sound like something that could pass here. I'm worried about the last sentence, though. It prohibits the publication of programs and tools to exploit vulnerabilities.
Yeah, right. That's an interesting one. So like Metasploit would presumably not be legal.
And pretty much everything in ethical hacking classes. Yeah. And this reminds me, I think France and Germany did this. And for a while, all the tools had to be out of the country.
Oh.
Yeah. So anyway, but I mean, I think like everything, it is a law, and what will matter is how they actually use it.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I do not read Chinese, so I can't read the text of this announcement. So I think there's a lot of parsing that needs to happen here. What the intentions are, how this is going to be enforced, what kind of compliance is going to be observed. One thing that has happened to security researchers in China in the past few years is they have been forbidden from participating in international competitions where there's the use of 0 days, for example.
Yeah, so I wonder if we're going to see the Chinese researchers at DEF CON anymore that we used to see.
Yeah,
or if we're going to get to have DEF CON China again in the future.
Well, I think that would be welcome because that involves us bringing stuff into China, which is what they want. But the local researchers would perhaps not be allowed to present any exciting findings there. We will see. Anyway, of course, COVID's frozen everything for a couple of years here, but all right. And then, so there's a pingdemic in the UK. The UK has been going through a complete circus over COVID. The Prime Minister declared that sometime like last week was going to be the opening day when everything opens. And then the Delta variant started exploding. And so then everybody's getting exposed to the Delta variant, like the Olympic athletes and everything. Everybody is close to somebody that's had the Delta variant. And so officially you're supposed to quarantine for like 10 or 14 days. And the Prime Minister said, well, I'm not going to quarantine because I'm too important. And everyone said, oh, you have to quarantine. So within half an hour, he said, okay, I'll quarantine. So I don't appear to be taking, but now the grocery stores are all running out of food because all the grocery workers have to quarantine for 10 days. And everybody is very annoyed by this. So their solution is to take the app off their phone. So it won't tell them to quarantine anymore. Because they put on one of those apps that we talked about months ago, these apps that are going to tell you when you've been exposed. And now it tells everybody they've been exposed because Delta is raging. And so if you take off the app, then you don't know and you don't have to quarantine. And so now this is called the pingdemic. Your phone pings, now you have to quarantine for 10 days, and it's always pinging. So the new solution is you don't have to quarantine, you just have to take a daily test instead, which, by the way, is what Trump did in the White House that resulted in everybody getting COVID. They were all taking tests. Those tests totally don't work. And they don't tell you until it's too late and you've already spread it. So anyway, it's a total madness over there, and just like it is over here, Delta is spreading like mad, cases doubling every week or two, and no significant containment strategy is available. I think both there and here, nobody is willing to seriously lock down again, and that is the only thing that would stop it. Unless, of course, people would actually get vaccinated, but I think that's hopeless, like campaign finance reform. I think we've discovered that people just won't do that.
Now
Anyway.
we have Lambda also.
Yeah, Lambda's coming out. And Lambda, you don't seem to know much about Lambda, but it might be worse than Delta.
And apparently it's so bad in Vegas that they're even talking about maybe implementing a 10-day quarantine, which would be pretty interesting. And might throw a wrench in the gears for Hacker Summer Camp this summer.
Well, I'm planning to be there teaching workshops in 2 weeks, but we will see what happens. They've already said we have to have proof of vaccination and wear masks, which I think is probably a wise plan.
I think so too, except for the fact that it's so easy to fake the vaccination proof that we already know that there are going to be people showing up with fake vaccination cards. So it's of limited utility, I think.
It is. And I remember there was, and I heard an argument where they were saying the original plan was you would have to show a vaccination card, not at DEF CON, but at someplace else, and your proof of identity. So you can't just use somebody else's vaccination card. And one of the states said, oh, that's too much bother, just show the vaccination card, because who would fake it anyway? So anyway, yep, we're, of course, now in the grand scheme of things, one thing I haven't heard any analysts say, this is how these pandemics actually end. If you don't have any solution, any mitigating solution like masks or vaccine, which apparently we don't in practice have enough of that to matter, then the way pandemics end is they mutate until they form a version that is much more contagious and less lethal. And that's the one that spreads and kicks out the other. And that's how you end up with the common flu.
Yeah.
And so I think, you know, the highly infectious Delta variant and the highly infectious Lambda variant are the stages by which the pandemic will burn itself out. And this gets us back to the original herd immunity strategy. Just spread it as much as possible, and then it will eventually burn itself out, just like other plagues, as long as you don't mind accepting that amount of death. And that does seem to be what's really happening to most of the earth.
There are a bunch of people that are going to not go now who didn't get vaccines, and that's probably good.
Oh, yeah. I think it's absolutely clear that there's an unexpected level of risk in going to DEF CON, which is troubling people. I'm going anyway. I'm committed, but I think I have my own belief in the mitigation. I think the mitigation is good enough to knock it down. The vaccine means you won't get too sick. That's what really matters. Although what people are discovering, of course, is when a doctor says it prevents a serious case, what they mean is you don't have to go to the hospital and die. People say, hey, I caught it and I felt really sick for a couple of weeks. That's a serious case. And doctors are like, no, that's what we call a mild case.
Right. As long as you're not on a ventilator, it's not a serious case.
That's right. And, you know, most people, you can feel pretty bad and not be what they think of as a serious case.
Yeah, and I will say, you know, con crud is a thing. People get sick every year from DEF CON anyway, so we'll see what it's like this year. Hopefully, you know, I think they're going to be pretty strict on the mask enforcement, at least in the DEF CON areas. You know, I think with masking and vaccines, it ought to be a little better. I don't know. You know, one thing that is concerning is that a lot of these buildings are really old, and I don't know about how up to snuff the ventilation systems are.
Probably not.
But yeah,
lots of air conditioning.
Yeah.
Well, you know, that's why I think the point is it was only ever 10 times more deadly than the flu. And I think the vaccine knocks it down by 2 factors of 10, and the mask probably another one. So I think DEF CON is probably, in practice, logically, this one will be safer than usual.
Yeah, I mean, I spent, you know, I went home and saw family in the Midwest, and every flight I was on was packed. Every airport I was in was just wall to wall people, many of them not wearing masks and fighting with the TSA agents about why they needed to put a mask on to go in. And, you know, I figure that's a pretty good dry run for DEF CON. There are a lot of similarities there. So, you know, came through that okay, knock on wood. Thank you, vaccine. But we'll see how it goes.
That's the main thing. Yeah. All right. Anyway, so then you got malware on Discord.
Yes, so pretty interesting blog post on the Sophos blog. They did some pretty good security research into Discord. And their findings were that Discord's content delivery network is hosting a metric ton of malware. And this isn't too big of a shocker to me, but the amount of it was kind of surprising, just because there's just the sheer volume of malware. There's just so much, and there was sort of an explosive growth from spring until now, like almost double the growth from springtime until now, which I thought was kind of interesting.
So you can put files in Discord?
You can, oh yeah, you totally can. And people regularly do host, send different stuff. And plus, there are all kinds of like add-ons and bots and stuff like that. And that's a pretty good place to stick your nasties if you're a threat, a malicious actor.
You have to log into Discord to see the files?
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine, but not necessarily, because you can also use it without creating a login sometimes.
Okay, so I did not know Discord was effectively a content delivery network as well.
Yes, they do operate a CDN, and it is it's pretty popular. When they did their research, both last year and this year. And so last year, their figure was they reported over 9,500 unique URLs hosting malware on their CDN. And then this year, they detected 17,000 of them, which is pretty interesting.
So do they have some kind of antivirus that stops you from putting up malware?
Not that I know of. They do. They do issue like takedown requests. They do, pay attention to it and get it when they can, I think. But I don't think that it's. It's clearly not. Their efforts are clearly not sufficient to clean that mess up.
Yeah, well, I know this is true of any content provider like Amazon.
What was interesting to me was that their servers are actually hosted on Google Cloud. And I would have thought that there would have been some would have been flagged in transit based off of that, but apparently not.
Yeah, apparently not. Of course, it's pretty easy to implement encryption to prevent that. But anyway. Yeah. Well, all right. And we're back to Kaitlyn with malware in neurons. So
Yes,
explain this. That's hard to understand.
it is a little hard to understand. So it's not actual neurons, although maybe it could be in the future. Vice has an article written by Rad de Leon. Basically, the idea is that you can use a form of steganography to hide malware within the training data for artificial intelligence. So the way that AI works is you give it a bunch of data and you tell it what it's supposed to see or what it's supposed to recognize. So you say, give it pictures of birds, and then you say, this one is a mockingbird, this one is a sparrow, this one is a pigeon. And then you keep giving it these pictures and it builds a neural network. And eventually the idea is that the computer can now recognize images and say, aha, this one looks like the sparrow I've seen earlier, it's probably a sparrow. And so there's a famous training model called, AlexNet. And it's about 200 megabytes worth of data. And what researchers did is they replaced about 36 megabytes worth of that data with malware. And it still operated at a very high rate. So it was able to be correct like 93% of the time. and keep in mind, AI is not like traditional programming where you get 100% accuracy all the time. It's, you know, it's intelligence, so it's sometimes kind of stupid. and so, but the fact that they're able to replace so many neurons with malware and still get a high percentage means that there's a new steganography technique that you could use on AI-enabled devices to hide and obfuscate your malware. So have fun, everyone.
So,
The AI revolution is coming.
so the nodes contain malware. What does that mean? The nodes do something other than intended?
Yes. So instead of having, for example, instead of encoding the strength of the connection, it can replace that data with bytes corresponding to a malware piece of software. So.
All right. So in a way, this just shows that the AI model is fault tolerant.
It's fault tolerant to the point where you can use it to hide malware in it and then distribute it without any antivirus software going off on it.
How does an AI distribute that software?
So so if you have an edge scenario AI, right? So it's AI encompassed on a edge device like a camera to figure out what is a face, like what a face looks like. The training data is already put on the phone. So it doesn't train while you're using the phone. It's set up in the lab and then sent to your phone like any other file, like a picture. So another famous example of steganography is hiding malware within pictures or messages within pictures. And it's the same idea. It just shows that it's because AI is so fault tolerant, you can really do a lot of changes to the AI data and still have something that appears to be working just fine, but actually contain a lot of malware. Whereas if you were to do that amount of changes to an image, you might start getting a lot of artifacts.
So they can somehow hide a second layer of data inside the AI training. And then how would you get the message out of the AI?
Well, you would obviously need a slim platform for getting it out. Like that would just read the file for the AI training file, and then just load the malware into. So there would have to be another element there. You can't just go straight from AI to, unless there's a bug in the AI program itself that would allow for a buffer overflow, but that's unlikely.
All right. Well, I don't quite get how it works, but anyway, I think they're absolutely right that AI is coming and all kinds of AI exploits are going to come. All right. And then we got Alan's quad layer wafers.
Yes, the Institute of Microelectronics in Singapore has announced that researchers have figured out how to stack 4 layers of silicon integrated circuits, and that this will then enable much higher density for and lower power consumption and better heat dissipation for complex integrated circuits. This is actually a major breakthrough, potentially. Although this is very early stages and it's early research and it's only just been announced, this has been predicted for quite some time. And this type of technology has been in place for different types of circuits for a number of years, many, many years, especially with NAND, for example.
Yeah, I was thinking, I've been hearing this for 30 years. So what's the new thing?
Yeah, but this is different because here we're talking about CPUs or GPUs using this stacking technology. And what makes it so great is that these different layers have what are called TSVs, or through silicon vias. So the different layers can communicate with each other. This is unlike the existing model where you have essentially planar silicon and everything is on just one layer. With the 4 layers, you actually cut down on the distance, the physical distance between the circuits inside. And so that allows for much lower power consumption and greater efficiency and potentially much wider buses. You can have much more communication between different components of the CPU or GPU or whatever it is. And so this could yield really tremendous performance improvements in the future. And it sounds like the technology more or less exists at this point. There's a lot of prep work that needs to go into it from what I understand. And yields will be an issue potentially. But in the future, at some point, as the technology matures, because you're essentially creating one CPU or GPU out of multiple smaller components that are then assembled together, you might actually have better yields because now you can just cherry pick each component and make sure it's good, and then assemble 4 good pieces rather than having to hope that all parts of your CPU are good, which oftentimes doesn't happen. And so you have a rather high defect rate that way.
Oh, okay, makes sense. I know if we could get to full 3D structures, it was supposed to be the giant leap forward faster than Moore's law.
Yeah, yeah. And so this might mean a return to Moore's law, as a matter of fact.
Yeah. Well, good. All right. And then, so there's a new Linux hole with a name, so it must be important, called Sequoia. And the point of this one is there's an internal measure of the path pointing to a file, which is copied to an unsigned 32-bit number, but then it's copied into a signed 32-bit number. So if you can make it half as big as the largest possible 32-bit number, it will be interpreted as negative. And so what you have to do is make a path that has a name that is a gigabyte long. So you make a chain folder within a folder within a folder until the path is more than a gigabyte long. And now you have the ability to write corrupt data to memory, and therefore you can take over the box, escalate to root, and all that jazz. So people are freaking out. Seems to apply to all versions of Linux. There's patches out there, and they say you got to patch right away. It's privilege escalation, remote code escalation, and so on. So typical, integer overflow, essentially. But if you don't want your stuff rooted, I guess you got to patch your Linux box. And then the last one is Liz with somebody else mining Bitcoin.
Yeah, this was kind of interesting. It's actually a 123-year-old hydroelectric plant in upstate New York, near where I go to school at RIT, that is found that they could make more money mining Bitcoin than they could selling renewable energy back to the grid, which is pretty amazing. This hydroelectric power company basically had set up a deal where they would get themselves all refurbished and up to snuff and licensed, and then sell power back to the national grid. And National Grid reneged on that deal and said, we're not going to do that. So the company found another way to make money and found out that they were doing much better with Bitcoin. I did think it was interesting that they're, despite the fact that they're doing well and making money off of this, their CEO still doesn't trust it, and they make sure that they cash it out right away.
Oh, I agree. I would too. But this is, there's a lot of people are mad about Bitcoin polluting the earth by consuming all the power, but there's the Bitcoin boosters say, oh no, it's promoting green energy. And this is the first example of it actually happening that I've seen.
Yeah, this is one of the oldest, renewable resources, power plants in the country or anywhere actually. And it was kind of interesting that they said, look, we'd like to sell this clean energy back to the grid, but we can't do it. So we got to find something else to do with it. And I thought this was a pretty interesting solution.
Yeah. If Bitcoin was mined with clean energy, I would hate it just a tiny bit less. Anyway.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's it for this one. And what is it, Friday? So we'll be back Tuesday morning.